All right, well, welcome to the Digital Fireside. I'm joined today with Stan Mattingly. He's the president of XY Consulting. It's located here in Indianapolis. And you're kind of a little bit of a renaissance man, I'd say. you kind of do a little bit of everything. And you're a lifetime entrepreneur, self-proclaimed tech head.
Yes.
And yeah, man. So I guess the reason why I had Stan on and have you on, essentially, is because you have such an interesting background with basically launching a startup and getting involved in that sort of landscape. And it seems to me on paper that sort of environment can be very intimidating to people.
Yeah.
And my perceived idea was that there'd be a lot of barriers to entry with that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that just with talking with you, and really kind of getting to know you, I think that this would be a really interesting listen for a lot of people that are maybe thinking about getting their own business started off the ground, or what kind of goes into that sort of thing, or maybe even from a hiring perspective.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
Stan,
I love to talk about it.
All right, I got you here,
definitely,
man.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
No, it's definitely something that I've always had a passion for, and really started. My goal growing up was always to actually start a real business, right? So I always had these, ideas. The first thing I would do is make a business card on Microsoft Word. That was kind of my original legitimized business. Like, if I have a business card, I have a business.
So kind of like that self-actualization, Tony Robbins kind
of. Yeah,
like
it was like,
board.
And then, yeah, exactly. And I kind of, as I got older, I started realizing, all right, let's take it a step further. We have all these business cards, but we've never sold anything. No, we did. I sold chocolates, lemonade stand, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But again, I always had this feeling of like, all right, how do we make a real business with a, company per se?
Right.
So, started looking into LLCs, those types of things. And just to kind of talk about the barriers of entry is, there really are none. The financial overhead per se in that process is startlingly low. And, these days you go through what's called the Secretary of State.
That sounds, as a layman like this, that sounds super intimidating.
Yeah,
So
that's what my ultimate kind of teaching that I have right now. I'm not a millionaire by any means, but if I do know anything, it would be about that process, and it is all online now.
Okay.
So very quick, and you get your. Talk about official. The first official thing you get is a nice branded piece of paper or a PDF from the Secretary of State that says, "Hey, you are now whatever it is LLC," cool. And that is a really cool feeling. And it's less than $100 to get that piece of paper.
Okay, so before we dive in too much into that, kind of walk us through a little bit and what Stan was like growing up, because clearly very motivated, idealistic, I'm going to make business cards and I hand out to all my classmates.
Yeah, and that is who I was.
Okay.
Always selling something, probably in a fashion that was annoying to naysayers per se. Oftentimes it was, I started out selling Monsters. I went to a Catholic school and energy drinks were kind of taboo.
Oh,
so,
my God.
I wasn't selling illegal things, but I was selling frowned upon legal things.
Right.
So I created kind of a demand for those and looking back on it, probably unethically quadrupled the cost of a Monster in the hallways of my Catholic school. But and kind of just always thinking of ideas and trying to figure out what that real legitimate business was going to be ultimately when I grew up. But
so what did you gravitate towards, like in school, for instance?
So it was normally on the cheaper side. So my mom actually gave me my first.
Let's come in just a little bit.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. There you go.
My mom gave me my first loan for $400, and I ordered T-shirts. So a lot of the original concepts were apparel, branding, lots of logos, lots of work on Microsoft Paint, man. Microsoft Paint was a powerhouse tool for my original businesses.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yes, yeah, and that's, talk about bootstrapping, Microsoft Paint, man.
So when you got, because I know a little bit about your background, and like you kind of started getting more involved in coding and programming a little bit.
Yeah.
And, we met at the gym, so like you don't really strike me initially. And I think people like us are slowly maybe breaking down that stigma of like, oh, he doesn't look like a coder, oh, he doesn't look like a programmer or whatnot. But what was it that really sort of, I guess, attracted you to coding? And did you find that, was that before you started to try and jump off into doing your own entrepreneurial endeavors, or?
Yeah, it was around the same time.
Okay.
And it goes hand in hand with kind of just low cost. We grew up in a time where I think you and I did, where everyone kind of had a family computer, or at least starting to have a family computer. And
right.
My brother, who's a little bit older than me, I always used to see him doing some wild stuff on the computer. And that nature of it was more so like downloading crazy programs,
right,
probably dangerous programs from a virus perspective. But, I kind of wanted to one-up him, like, all right, you have these cool, like, animation programs you find, but, like, what's behind them, right?
Right.
How can we get a little bit deeper than that and make these programs, I guess. So I actually went to an ID Tech camp, if you ever remember those flyers at school.
Yeah,
they used to put them in like your cubby or whatever. So I went to Purdue and did that for a whole week and learned Java was my first language. Yeah,
Java, okay.
Yep.
Because I see similarities, and stop me if this doesn't relate to you at all, but like for me, a lot of like learning all this extra stuff was almost born out of necessity, in a sense where it's like, okay, I have this vision for, and in my case it wasn't a business, it was more like a story, like a written experience or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I have a vision for this, and I either don't have enough money to pay someone to do this sort of stuff, or I want to have more control over this stuff because I'm kind of figuring out as I go. So I'm going to go ahead and learn how to like code or program. I'm going to do it myself. Like, do you kind of have that similar sense where?
And you almost have to. I actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was thinking that on the way over here. Is there's this perceived, or I guess exaggerated, gap in the programming / tech industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the barriers to entry in that industry are actually the lowest of anything that has ever existed. Okay, back in the Industrial Revolution, if you want to get into building a factory or manufacturing, you're going to have to take on a pretty hefty financial burden. But what's wild, though, is up the lines of what you're talking about in terms of not having the financial capacity to create something. That's the knowledge gap is what creates that massive cost. I mean, you go to an app development firm down the street and they're going to give you a $500,000 quote for an MVP.
Mm-hmm.
So that really is what it was about. Was how can I beat that intense financial burden there, and kind of because when you learn it, I mean, it's free. I mean, it's all open source.
It's all up here afterwards.
You go from $500,000 to virtually zero in time.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that really started to blow my mind. Was this revelation where, because I went to a coding boot camp, so to learn specifically like JavaScript, and what really kind of blew my mind was this realization that like, a lot of this stuff is like freely available knowledge online. The stuff, they're teaching us, but like they're using these like ebooks or whatever, or I forget what they call them. It was like it was like a documentation form. And like you could look up, and I found ones that were, in my opinion, even better than the ones the instructors gave us. So it's like you kind of learn really quickly when you start learning coding how to Google and how to effectively Google.
Yeah.
And you start to realize that like even these crazy problems that you might see like a senior developer handle, oftentimes there's a search engine involved in some of those.
And absolutely.
It's kind of empowering in a very cool way. And I think that stuff is, I'm kind of with you that I think that if you are looking to pursue a entrepreneurial endeavor, that it would definitely behoove you to learn how to code, at least to some kind of extent. So you might be able to chip in and help with like, bug fixes, or kind of get an idea of what your programmer or developer is doing.
Yes.
Let's see.
Yeah, my major is actually informatics, and it's on
no
the
kidding.
lower side of that tech spectrum. So I kind of took it to the max. From my knowledge, I guess bucket is a little bit fuller in terms of programming techniques and fundamentals than
Right.
your average informatics graduate is, but that's pretty much what the informatics degree is for, is at least having this kind of surface level understanding of development. They make you take some database classes, and they make you kind of get deep into the code for a couple semesters, but at the end of the day, it's really the best way I can explain it is you have your full-fledged businessman over here, your full-fledged Mark Zuckerberg over here. You need someone in the middle that can translate between the two. So it's quite interesting, actually, that kind of need there for a middleman in just communication. That kind of goes up. I think you mentioned that. It's like people like you and I don't really strike, or you don't see me walking down the street and you're like, all right, he is a programmer. Because there are certainly people, they're called Mountain Dew programmers. Nothing against them, but you can tell you're like, all right, you program a lot. I do, but it's good to have people skills also.
Yes, yeah. And that's kind of what drew me to playing around in the UI UX kind of sector a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So start me off a little bit with we addressed your education a little bit, kind of got a sense of who you kind of were personality wise.
Yeah.
Growing up. I'm going to segue a little bit here because I think that it's interesting to me of similar personality traits in people who are highly successful, highly engaged, who are the kind of people that would start up a business.
Yeah.
Do you think that, was it a nature or a nurture kind of thing? Did you kind of maybe almost realize, okay, there was a need that you had to address, so you adopted a certain personality trait, or did it kind of come naturally to you? Like, for example, okay, I'm very creative, but I need to learn how to be a better public speaker or communicator, so I will become that as well.
Yeah. I guess at its core, like my true entrepreneurial roots, I think are by nature.
Yeah.
But the skills you have to learn, we were kind of talking about that before this started, is like, yeah, you can build something, you can think about these brilliant ideas, but at the end of the day, you really have to be polished on sales, marketing, all these different things that you're like drowning in.
Yeah.
And those definitely are by need, and you have to. Those are definitely not by nature. The little kind of nodes that come off of this core of entrepreneurship are definitely things that you have to learn and pay attention to.
Yeah, I remember there was a class that I took in college where, and I don't know if this was the instructor's intent, but I almost got the sense where it was like you're either born with it or you're not. And I think that, to me personally, as someone who, like to my earlier example, that kind of like adapted, I wasn't always a great communicator.
Mm-hmm.
I was up until about senior year of high school, I was pretty shy, in all honesty. I was very kind of reserved or whatnot, but I ended up, realizing, okay, my creativity, my vision, yada yada, are only going to take me to a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
I can reach so many more people. I can expand on this sort of stuff if I learn, to emulate. At least for me, it was emulating at first, but if I learn to kind of adapt these certain personality traits.
Yeah.
So I guess it's interesting to kind of hear that, because I think that you definitely you have this innate sort of nature about it. It's a infectious kind of charisma. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
But drawing to that, it's definitely something that I think is interesting, where people can also learn kind of to emulate sort of this stuff as well, because like almost anything, sales is a skill that either some people have an innate advantage in it, but you can learn how to be effective at sales.
Yeah.
So when you kind of get to, let's rewind it back a little bit. So when you kind of are, graduating, or you're finishing up your education, and then you make this first, cognizant decision to branch out into, was it just straight from that, or was there like a day job that you had in the meantime?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah, it was interesting because my resume, I got a job. I did.
Okay.
I worked for a year for a larger company.
Okay.
But the problem, you almost kind of shoot yourself in the foot because my resume is pretty good from a technical perspective, but it's all like founder, co-founder, and they're they literally looked at me and they were like, can you even work here? Like, and I sat there and was like, wow, that's the craziest question you've asked all day. I did the programming exam. I got asked all these technical questions, and then this guy looked at me and said, can you even work here? And I said, yeah, I can. But, in the back of my head, I knew, that it was kind of a white lie. I mean, I did great there. I do very well working at places. But at the end of the day, I was going home and, working more on personal endeavors and, was trying to work through exhaustion, and trying to keep my wits, my entrepreneurial wits sharp. Because that was the thing that I was most scared of. How long can I work somewhere before I ultimately forget who I originally was? And that risk to me is, it's so scary to me. I'm like, what if in 10 years I just don't have this passion anymore because I got stuck somewhere?
Dude, that resonates with me so much.
Yeah, it was terrifying.
Yeah, like exactly the same way we're like, working day jobs while writing on the side and doing some other creative outlets. I was worried that, I would end up kind of feel like, at least for me, it was like this like nebulous sort of like molasses trap of like falling into the 9-to-5 routine and like getting, losing sight of what I really was. So like I would be this like, walking movie cliche of like the guy in his 40s or something like that.
Exactly.
Like, I wish I did this when I was in my 20s.
And then, I mean, and life happens too, we're young. But imagine, I just could not stop thinking about, okay, what if I just push this one more year, and then next thing you know, I'm, who knows, other things, I'm getting married, having kids, and then you're pretty much really locked in.
Yeah.
And it's a lot harder to take those risky leaps of faith. It's not impossible, but for me, it's like, all right, I've got the opportunity here to just go broke if I really have to, without hurting anyone else but myself, which is really what matters.
That's a really powerful thing to say because I think, especially in the Midwest, I think there is a cultural tendency to kind of, and I think it's steadily moving away from that, but at least for our previous generations and stuff like that, you get married relatively young and you kind of dive into that and then you kind of get locked in. And, I think that freedom that you have when you're, young and single and that sort of stuff, I think it's an incredibly liberating and powerful thing that really now is the best time to make these kind of like mistakes if you want to make mistakes. And like now is, the ideal time to do that sort of stuff, whether it's, starting your own business, whether it's, making music or whatever, taking these risks. There's a really cool quote from Bill Burr, I think, where he was talking about, and I'm going to butcher this so badly, but it's something along the lines of like, a crappy life is not, sleeping on someone's futon, at 35 or whatnot while you're pursuing your dream. A crappy life is, waking up at, 45 to a woman that you didn't really fully loved or whatever, that you got married just because it was expected of you, then had kids, and then realized you wasted, your youth trying to pursue, just doing what everyone else wanted you to do, essentially.
I like that you said that, it is, I hadn't thought about it that way, but it definitely is a culture here because there's two sides to the story. Is like, I have more freedom than my buddy who got, married 1 year out of high school or something, right? But at the same time, it's a lonely life doing what even, you and I both do, or, just trying to be a creator, and then trying to also not get wrapped up in that culture. And you almost sometimes wake up and you're like, oh my, like, am I doing this wrong? Like, am I the wrong one?
No, I totally get that.
And it's you have to learn to fight that. There's certainly times where you go, you have your peaks and valleys, but
I 100% get where you're coming from, and I found for me, typically any time that I go out to a city on the coast, like even New York or just over the summer in LA, that's almost like the reinvigorating shot to kind of like remind me that like, okay,
Yeah.
it is kind of a very centralized Midwestern kind of cultural thing to get settled down really young in your like, mid-20s or whatnot. And, there are plenty of people that, that are actually out here in LA or in New York or Atlanta or something. They're trying to make it happen. And I think that the environment is really important for development. And at least for me, for my external, I'm very external, and like my environment kind of almost sets the tone for how creative I am. So typically I'll have my own office. I will have, I can't really work so well from my home computer. I have to I'm very meticulous with like how I am the most functional. And, really interesting that you kind of brought that up about that, juggling almost like your day job and then, that what you're really kind of passionate about.
Yeah.
How did you do that? Like, how did you keep on that grind?
Dude, it's passion. I mean, that's, when you work at those big companies, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
But what you also learn a lot about is that 99% of people working with you don't have a passion for it, and they're very sad. And to me, I love writing code nearly as much as I just love entrepreneurship. And to put my heart into a solution that, it doesn't really matter whether I took as long as the guy who, the quality just doesn't matter as much at a corporate level. It's like, all right, does it work? Is the client happy? Cool. So, whether the individual sitting next to you is, cranking out subpar to average results that work, and then you're over here like, how do I make this fun? I love writing code. It's, that part is tough. So back to the original question of, how do you keep your ability to pursue your other endeavors, is that's kind of why I was getting home. I'm like, I got to fulfill this gap. Because for the majority of the day, I'm not. So I just have to do it.
Yeah. Did you find that, in that crucial step, because I feel like we are sometimes at our most vulnerable when we're at that sort of like halfway point where it's like, you've got your day job, and this kind of, passion is a side hobby. At this point, it's a glorified hobby, and it's like, can I really devote enough of myself into this and juggle this and make this happen? So did you have maybe like a podcast or a mentor or someone that you would talk to on the side as well to kind of help maybe realign you?
Yeah. So definitely family. My family is largely very entrepreneurial as well, even out through my extended family. When you asked me about a book, I don't read enough, so I was like, I don't have a book. But yeah, definitely podcasts, a lot of YouTube stuff. You can learn a lot from YouTube, which I was negligent on until really quite recently. The quality of content on YouTube has just drastically increased since the days when I watched it every day in like third grade. So, that's been huge. And Reddit. Reddit is awesome. And contributing to Reddit is something I just started doing. And that can help a lot if you can find that right community, right? And if you know what like imposter syndrome is, that's kind of what kept me from posting for so long. And then I started doing that and started even just commenting answers, right? I mean, you don't have to make an original post, but all those sorts of things really help with growth, trying to keep your mind sharp. And even, just little wins every day that can keep you moving forward.
I like that. I like the little wins part because I think it is. I think it's an amalgamation of these little steps that you take over time that produce this wonderful kind of motivating presence. And, that stuff helped me a ton. I used to be stubborn. And again, I'm not comparing this to starting a business or anything like that. We both are creative endeavors, but like for me with writing, and hopefully someone listening here can relate to what we're talking about with their music that they're trying to make or their acting or whatever. But like, I felt sometimes that I was I didn't make a cognizant decision to reach out to and try and find that sort of external sort of environment like you did, at least initially. I was kind of more, withdrawn and sort of just like, okay, well, I got my day job, working at this gym or whatever, but secretly I'll go and pursue this stuff. And I found over time that I was less inclined to pursue my passions, and kind of I felt myself like a toe in that molasses pit and kind of slipping away.
Oh, and that's huge what you're talking about, because when I'm talking about contributing to Reddit and these things, this is new for me too. I'm not this guy that's been doing all these crazy things since I was 7. It's a long trail of learning, doing things wrong for a while, figuring out it was wrong, adjusting, continuing, and then it's kind of a cycle. But on that note, it is before I kind of open myself up to contributing and even teaching people. I've been teaching a lot. You can really seclude yourself. I used to just sit in my room and or sit at my computer, right, and just put all this pressure on my shoulders to come up with an idea. Just sit there and think. Yeah. And that is not how you're going to find an idea. You absolutely have to get out into the world, even if it's in the internet world. Walk down the sidewalk. I've gone through times where I don't do that, and I'm just constantly putting pressure on my shoulders to, like I said, think of an idea. It's like you just can't. You can't. It's detrimental for sure.
Yeah. So when it's funny that you brought that up, because that really it resonates with me a lot. Because how did you ground yourself? Because one of the biggest problems I had is once I started getting some traction with my writing and I had my first big success trying to make this film about 2 years after the fact, that I wanted it to do all of these things. It was like, this was my creative process.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I wanted to accomplish all these, almost grandiose things.
Yeah.
And as a result of that put an insane amount of pressure on me.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, it led to this production of lesser quality work. I was more critical on myself. Having these insane expectations, it was really the antithesis of what, my original success was, like how it was created, because that was kind of from a place of just, creativity and kind of like figuring out as I went and doing all this sort of stuff. And it's interesting to me having those two different experiences, where one of them you kind of come from a place of insane pressure and just this overbearing kind of, at least for me, it was like I put all these unrealistic expectations on myself, so now I have to deliver on that. I'm like, well, how am I going to do that? And it doesn't come from a place of like earnest, genuine kind of creativity and fun or and wonder. So like, how do you temper your expectations with because I know it's easy to probably be like, I'm going to create this, philanthropic group that solves, world hunger, and it's going to be great. Like, I make this app that feeds everybody.
Well, it's funny because I don't. I have the same problem. But, it's at the end of the day, and not to sound too like internet guru-y here, because I say this all the time, but it's the market, Ultimately, if, what you're doing is not providing positive results, you're probably doing something wrong,
right.
And it's probably not as great as you thought. And that's just what happens 99% of the time. I mean, you have to have a lot of stamina to do things like, to have this grand plan like you're talking about in anything, whether it's business or music or art. Yeah, you just have to take it step by step and not give up when things don't go your way. Because even like I was telling you, I mean, when you build a big software as a service product, and you don't speak to people for 4 months, and then you speak to the first person, and they're like, "Oh, but does it do this?" And you're like, "No, it doesn't yet." So that can be very, very frustrating. But you just got to do it. I mean, we started cranking out. We cranked out more features in 2 weeks post-release of our product than we did, the whole time. And they were more effective.
Holy
I shouldn't
crap.
say more features, but more effective features. Because the core was there, but then we started talking to real people, and they're like, it should do this. We were like, yes, it should. So let's do it.
Right.
So it really is just, it's a leap of faith and then a recursive need for improvement, I would say. And that's
really well
applicable to, I think, a lot of different fields. Make a post and then pull it down and post it again with little tweaks to it, different things like that.
Yeah, I think for me, like when I found that historically I'm very bad at predicting the future. So it's like when I try and have this vision for a project or an idea or whatever, it's almost the end result is almost never what that initial vision was, because I was only talking to myself, essentially.
Yeah.
I wasn't going out in the real world and encountering different people that impact and shape the nature and help mold it into something that is, in the end, in my experience, has been more powerful because of that.
Yeah.
Because, you kind of have that real human kind of touch on it, that spin on it.
You just have to talk to people.
Yes, that really is the biggest thing.
You have to meet people, and I appreciate, I was going to say that. I appreciate you inviting me on this, because I think you mentioned flying out to LA was kind of your last little shot in the leg.
Yeah.
That's all I've been thinking about this whole time. Like, this is really cool. I'm talking to someone for the first time this. No, I'm kidding.
The first time in 12 weeks.
Yeah. Oh man, but thank you.
Yeah. Well,
that's
so
awesome.
I'm so glad we can vibe with this kind of stuff, because I think that whether you're in the the startup sector, or if you have an specific art that you're trying to pursue, or whatever the hell it would be, I think there's a lot of overarching similarities with the specific things may be different, but the feelings of like imposter syndrome, or the feeling of like juggling a day job and then working on your passion. I think that we all share. We all share it, and we all kind of have this sort of fear of like, I don't want to end up like, for me, I won't say which job, but I looked at someone who was my boss, and he probably had about 25 years on me, and he was doing the same thing or whatnot, and I just kind of observed him over the period of a few months, and kind of how he interacted and how he just his data and like the stuff he would talk about, and like you get to know someone decently well when you spend 8 hours a day kind of in the same office as them, and especially when he's like your specific boss, and I just got this weird fear where it's like again, it's like I don't know his life story completely, so that may be the most practical thing for him. He may not. He may enjoy this stuff. It didn't seem like he was enjoying what he was doing. He just seemed very apathetic, and I had this sort of like fright where it's just like I don't want that. If I have a chance to try and course correct, I'd rather take that chance now before I get involved with a wife and kids and a family and insane pills and all that kind of stuff. So I mean that resonates a lot, man.
Yeah, and something I should mention too up that same kind of path is that I didn't talk about is entrepreneurship. Is entrepreneurship with an I, is where you create from within an organization. So identifying a need or a problem within your company, and this, again, I said entrepreneurship, but I'm not even really talking about that, is a way to avoid, or at least avoid that feeling or fear, and then also kind of make your experience a little better at a day job that you might not see as a long term, is to try to intertwine your true passion with it. So I created an app for my company, and you have to be careful. I did it the wrong way. I did it way too quick.
Okay,
it was
so
like,
be careful when you
It was like 3 months in, and I'm like, hey, I built something for you guys. And they're like, what do you even know about us? I'm like, well, it's cool, right? But so I built a timekeeping app for our consultants, because currently it's a very large company I was working at. Everyone was keeping time on notepads and Excel and all these different things. And I'm like, we need like a cool thing to help us do this. And I needed to build something. So I did that. But even, if you're an artist, paint a picture and ask if you can hang it on the wall. They're always, a lot of these companies are always looking for new things. And I think being able to identify things like that, and even try to get approved time, because I ended up getting approved time for that app once I made the mistake of sending the all-company email when I wasn't allowed to. They did appreciate it eventually. So be smart about it without overstepping. Yeah. But there are definitely plenty of ways you can strategically gain the ability to do the things you love, even in a place that isn't conducive to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point.
Mm-hmm.
So was XY Consulting your first attempt at a startup, or was there other kind of?
Kind of.
Okay.
It's the first. So I ran my first real LLC. It was called College Deeds with a Z, LLC.
How old were you when you made that?
I was 18, so I
Explains
was,
the Z at the end.
yeah. Business names, we can get into that too.
Yeah.
You should always pick the most generic name ever.
Really?
I mean, you just look around you. I mean, all the biggest companies, they don't have anything nifty about them. There's no Z. There's no, just be very simple. But anyways, so I ran that that was supposed to be a startup. So It was supposed to be a TaskRabbit type thing, where it was a.
So when you say TaskRabbit,
it was supposed to be the Uber for odd jobs. So homeowner says, I need my garage cleaned. College deeds person claims it and goes and does it for a estimated rate. I thought it was, this is the other thing, do your research. I thought it was the craziest idea in the world. I thought I needed an NDA and stuff. And then I went and talked to a real entrepreneur, and he quickly Googled 5 products with funding already that did the same thing. So long story short, College Deeds ended up just being a landscaping company, and it was awesome.
Oh, there you go.
So, yeah, ran that all through college until I had to get an internship.
So you did that while you were in college?
Just in the summers.
That's awesome.
So did a lot of, again, I was that guy. You got to choose between entrepreneurship and friends. No, but you can, I've learned better to reel myself back, but I was oftentimes posting in group me's that had nothing to do with homeowners about landscaping products. Like, what are you doing, dude? But yeah, so then I had ran another startup for 2 years. What I did is I had to get an internship, and I said, well, can I work for myself for an internship? And they were like, absolutely not. So I worked for my family business and built a timekeeping service that was technically my startup, but kind of, hopefully don't get in trouble for this, but it was under the veil of working for my family company. So, so I really was working for myself, but building a product for both.
Cool. Okay.
So that turned into a real thing. It was Paycrete LLP. And it was my brother and I. And that's kind of what we were talking to you about.
Yeah,
so
I remember that.
That is no longer.
Okay.
That is no longer. But we did that for, I think, 3 years.
So, but clearly, like, all this stuff is building towards something. So, like, you learn so much from, like, I feel like, at least for me, I learn by failing a ton.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounds cliche, but it's so entirely true. But, like, what were the things that you learned from those attempts?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing that this is within the last year, and it's the most obvious, but when you're starting a business, you can think you have a good idea, but at the end of the day, it does not matter. You have to provide value to somebody, and you cannot, so again, this is where Paycrete failed, was that we had a very cool system for keeping time. But the software was built in a fashion where in order to get the value out of it, the business had to change. And if the cost of entry is a mom and pop concrete company having to completely change their back office just to sign up for our app, it's like, how? What's the point,
Right.
So, and that's also something I learned hand in hand working, for a year in corporate, is seeing how real big business software is made. And it's all about flexibility, configuration, customization. Like, here's the tool, but you can literally do whatever you want with it. Paycrete was like, you have to do this. And they're like, we don't want to. You're like, okay.
It's kind of interesting how, even that quote unquote 9-to-5 job that wasn't maybe your passion, like, you still ended up learning stuff.
Oh yeah,
that.
tons.
Like,
tons.
especially as a entrepreneur. Like, that's. Would you almost recommend people try and do that first? In a sense?
Something I was talking huge on. I haven't quite rounded this philosophy out yet, so don't hold me to it. But it was kind of the 1 year mantra per se.
Okay.
And within that year, if you really pay attention, so if you don't just do your job, kind of keep your eyes peeled for processes, behaviors, position types. Like, why does this company have somebody doing this? Well, look a little deeper into it. If you have access to a file storage, repository, which you probably will, dig a little deeper than you're supposed to into it, you know. Find. So that's what I did. So for a straight year, I was paying attention to these professional, developer habits that I didn't have, but then also paying attention to the business side of things and like, okay, so this is how a real corporation is structured with, you know, CEOs, directors, managers, all these different things. I think is key. You won't know how to do that. You won't. I had no idea. College doesn't teach you that at all.
So jumping ahead a little bit here and talking about what you're currently working on now.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about XY Consulting.
Okay. So XY Consulting is what we founded. I founded it with two partners, both from the same company in January of this year. We worked nights for 6 months. One of the partners left pretty early in the process. So myself and a partner left in June. That leap was semi-calculated. We made sure to really kind of build the core of a company and take it seriously in terms of, you know, why do we exist? You know, we did all the cheesy stuff. We did the pillars, you know, all the stuff that you think you shouldn't do. We decided to do this time around,
right? Just
to make sure that we did have, you know, some sort of idea of a culture, direction, all those different things. So yes, it's called XY Consulting. Our goal originally was to do business-to-business applications completely custom for that company. So legitimate consulting, going in, finding out processes that needed to be converted to digital solutions, and providing those on a billable basis. We went through several sales cycles, one of which took forever just to find out they didn't want to do it. That was tough. So then I kind of, you know, from the president, CEO chair was like, all right, let's just build something. Let's take a risk. You know, we saved our money, so we were set out for an agreed upon amount of time. And I'm like, well, we could either go through that process again, you know, do all this. We were jumping through so many hoops. I mean, we were printing out big posters. You know, we really did it right in terms of the sales cycle for these consulting things, and they just didn't pan out. And so we decided to go the product route. And this product, I believed, was actually a real issue. You know, I saw a need in the real world, actually at the gym that we go to, and decided to pursue that. So that product is called xyissue.com, and it's asset management issue tracking using QR codes. So big thing that I also learned from the job I had for a year was ERP systems and largely business enterprise software is so complex that the leadership is very happy with it, but the employees who are actually in the field do not do anything right, typically. They do, but they don't. They don't like it. It definitely infringes on their day-to-day fluidity of work. So the goal with our application was to facilitate the most inbound data with the least amount of button clicks. So how can we track lots of data about an asset, particularly service-based issues, maintenance, without employees having to do anything that could possibly go wrong?
Okay.
So we use QR codes to tie it to, basically you scan the QR code, it takes you directly to the form you need to see, and then you click one button. There's a couple inputs that they can configure, but largely one button click. So we've been selling that. That's, you know, getting technical about the product, but in terms of processes, that's where it gets tough. You build an idea, it's awesome, you think it's awesome, you find out you have to make changes, you pivot a little bit, and then you got to go into sales mode. And you know, as a bootstrapped small company, that's where you have to wear all those different hats and those different kind of extending ligaments from the entrepreneurial core. Is like, okay, now you really have to be a badass salesman. Like, you can't just think you know how to do sales. You you can't say the wrong things. You got to keep the conversation positive. You got to figure out how you can best word things. I mean, I never knew that. You got to be a wordsmith to be a good salesman. It's wild.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at right now. I'm actively learning how to be a salesman right now.
Well, that's good. I think that's definitely I think no matter what you choose to go into, especially if you're trying to, like you're saying, bootstrap it on your own, I think learning at least, a little bit of salesmanship goes a long, long way.
People skills.
Crucial.
Yes.
So let's start when you kind of had that initial idea for the company.
Mm-hmm.
What did that look like to you? I mean, were you just like writing notes on your iPhone, or how did that work out?
So I always had this idea. It was this phrase, 30 days, 30K.
Okay.
So your average app development company will tell you, you'll go in there, they will literally give you a $100,000 quote. For typically any software as a service idea, your average non-coder is going to have you're looking at $100,000 for an MVP. With the technology that I use and kind of, my ability, I like to think I'm really good at building at database design. So basically taking real world concepts and, popping out a database that's going to store that in a way that makes sense. So the idea there was like, all right, let's tell people that for $30,000, we will build their MVP in 30 days and have it ready to go.
Wow.
That was kind of a fantasy, right? It didn't happen, but that was the idea. It was like, why is there all this like bulk and so much, that just takes forever. There's this status quo out there that it has to take 6 months to a year. And sure, it does. It depends on the complexity. People are going to listen to me say this, be like, he is very wrong. I get that. There are definitely different complexities of applications. Games take forever. But in terms of a data-centric application, from an MVP perspective, I think that it can be done in 30 days. Risky. So we didn't do that, but that's where it started. Then we kind of moved to, all right, let's be more professional about this.
So when you're starting it, what was your first step? Register the LLC?
A little bit of more planning before that was my original first step in high school. All right, let's just register it. And then you're like, once you get into that, it's harder to get out of, right? Like let's hold off on the LLC registration for a couple days.
Right. So a lot of a
lot of
meetings.
planning, meetings. So a lot of we largely we all lived in Indy, but we going home from work and stuff. So we were doing a lot of Google Hangout stuff.
Right.
Pretty much the second half of the day or the night, so from 7 to 11 p.m., kind of just planning and talking. Then we registered, bought a domain name, which was pretty awesome. We were able to get xy.consulting. So that was fun.
That is pretty cool. So we're looking at a startup cost right now of less than $500. I don't know how expensive
the domain name was
but
not a super smart financial decision. That one was expensive. We could have. Let's talk about $12 domains though. So right now we're at your normal domain's going to be $12 or so. So yeah, I mean, registering with the state is sub $100. Let's call it $85, I think. Okay. So even with a domain and a real LLC, you're still right around $100, and within the day. So then really the next step is also going to the bank, open up a bank account. That goes hand in hand with getting your LLC. It's like, all right, let's be even more real and go open a bank for it. And that's fun. That's really fun.
Yeah.
Getting a debit card with your name and a business name on it is like the coolest thing.
I bet. Sounds
If we're talking like just little wins, right? Little wins.
Well, I think that's also like it's little things that slowly build in this persona. Or this,
and I think that kind of goes back to what I was talking about. Is like when I was little, I mean, to me, a business was a business card. It's like if I have a business card, I mean, I'm in business. So like now, like that, like
I love that.
The older me is like, all right, I have a debit card with a printed name on it. Like that's pretty sweet.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, and then the piece of paper is always a good thing to like frame. It's a cool looking like government document with like a stamp on it and everything. So
and it's wild to me because I always was under the assumption that start on business. I mean, you got to have a lawyer, you got to have an attorney,
Yeah.
you got to figure out people to sign all these papers. And
Yeah, and this business actually is the first one I've ever actually retained counsel on or gotten a lawyer for. So like College Deeds it was as real as it gets. I mean, it was an LLC.
Sounds real as it gets, man.
QuickBooks, everything you need to run a business. I think College Deeds really is probably the best example of like, just start a business. I mean, just do it. We ended up doing some pretty good revenues the second year just from brand awareness. I mean, we were doing like guerrilla marketing. We were putting signs out by Clay Terrace, and like got calls, like lots of calls. People are sitting there like, yeah, I saw your sign. I'm like, it works.
Awesome.
Like the things, it literally is just like hustle. Like those little things work well. So like if we didn't have things to do, I'd have guys just go put flyers in mailboxes. And some people get mad about that, but most of the time it goes well.
Yeah.
And that was probably the best experience. Learning experience. So just starting a landscaping company.
Do you think that would almost serve as a better, like hypothetically for the viewer or the listener who is like, saying, okay, well, this clearly is not as hard as I thought it was going to be in order to start a business. Would College Deeds serve as a better kind of frame of reference for that as you kind of walk through how you establish that? Or would XY Consulting? What do you think?
XY Consulting is tough. I mean, but it is, I think it's the...
Well, it sounds like
that's
a lot
what I'm doing right now. It's a lot,
it's a lot more in depth.
It is because there's just a lot more channels, and we're trying to launch a product, right?
Yeah.
I think the service industry, and this kind of, I don't want to go down this tangent, but it gets into like this idea that like you have to go to college and get this white collar job. It's like, dude, if I was to quit college and just run College Deeds, I would have had a career. I mean, we were doing so well in the summers. I'm not even just trying to brag. It's just the simplicity of laying mulch down. Like you're gonna sweat and get your hands dirty, but if you can delegate right, certainly you can create a career for yourself.
And I think that's eye-opening too, because as we're getting more and more people in our generation kind of approaching the homeowner buying age and realizing that they are thousands of dollars in debt from college, that the job market isn't quite the same, and things are definitely evolving. We're kind of living in this interesting, I don't want to say tumultuous, but could be. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But like we're living in this interesting time where, that even very American example of what you did, I think is incredible. And I think that is something that we almost lose sight of, where we definitely struggled. At least I struggled with kind of fighting this sort of like conditioning that I was taught as a kid that like, okay, if you don't go to college, you cannot get a good paying job. Like bingo. And like, and then now the market is so saturated with people who have college degrees that are, unless you're in a STEM field, are more.
Well, there's not passionate either. I mean, I don't care what your degree is. If you're not passionate, if you don't like I said, I mean, working for the company I worked for, it's like, guy has the same degree as me, but just he's just not. He won't be there.
He won't rig code and like stuff.
And it's literally kind of becomes like a factory for like so code, and that's kind of what made me not enjoy it. It's like, all right, it works, but like, could you have done it better? Like, probably.
What would you rate yourself?
Yeah.
Let me adjust the camera real quick, and we'll continue.
Yeah.
So we were talking about College Deeds with a Z.
With a Z.
And kind of how that was a fundamental, learning opportunity for you, and how really, in all honesty, you could have just chosen to launch that into a career if you wanted to. Do you think there is a need for more entrepreneurs now? Or how do you view kind of the marketplace? Is it a crowded marketplace? Are there people your age that are trying to do this stuff? Because a lot of the startups that I have, I've worked for or have friends that have done this stuff, the people in charge of them, leading the charge per se, tend to be, I would say probably late 40s, early 50s, that sort of thing, because they have the perceived kind of capital or investment or whatnot.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I had this pretty juvenile fear growing up about this whole thing, because I literally have always known I was going to be an entrepreneur, like since like I was 7, and it's never left my mind. But I went through this period where I was like so afraid that if I talked about it so much that then really it was the idea that like, what's stopping anyone else? Because that's the truth. There is nothing. So, I always thought that is like, all right, well, what if somebody else beats me to the punch on all this stuff that I think is going to be so cool? But at the end of the day, what you have to realize is just not everyone is wired that way. And they just aren't. And there's a lot of people that will do it, and there's a larger population that won't. And we all have our own kind of execution techniques per se, and that's really what it's all about. Is who's going to execute the best, and that's definitely something you should be weary of, because that keeps everyone growing and moving forward. In terms of competition. But no, I think just the standard natural rate that's out there. I don't think it's overpopulated. I definitely don't have a bunch of friends starting businesses. Like I have a lot of people that do not like me for how many businesses I've started.
Well,
like
explain
absolutely.
that.
There's just so many people that get so frustrated because I'm tweeting about
Oh,
one product, and then 6 months later there might be something else, and
well, that's the hustle, man. I don't
right.
know. You can't knock you for that.
No, and again, there's those little like 6-month ideas that I have. Those I don't file LLCs for. That's what people need to understand. I'm not out here. I don't own like 400 LLCs. I have little side projects that I enjoy tweeting, letting people know about. But people genuinely don't like that, which is fine by me. Right. And that's why I'm happy with XY Consulting, because that's kind of like that's my baby right now. And it's real. And, I work 40 hours plus a week on that. But then I also do stupid stuff. So
well, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, so let's go back to College Deeds real quick. So this was kind of your first kind of foray into the sector. So what was probably the hardest struggle that you didn't anticipate with that? What is something, and maybe if that's, try not to look for something that maybe was unique to your experience if you can, something that maybe might be applicable to other hopeful
people, in particular employees. Will be that will be a struggle for everybody. Managing people and learning to juggle, learning to not even just juggle, but learning to when to apply pressure and when it's just you. Because something that all entrepreneurs eventually have to swallow, and this was tough for me, is that nobody else is going to care about your business. Nobody. You could hire the best person out there, but at the end of the day, they're going to go home and not have to think about it. And even it was called College Deeds, so I really shot myself in the foot on this one because I only hired college kids, which was very hard to manage from a human resources perspective, because college kids like to party, and sometimes when you have to mulch at 8 a.m, it's kind of hard. So I struggled with that, and trying to be the cool boss, but also enforce some level of seriousness, because it was a real business. It's like, dude, come on, you're getting changed out of your party attire like at the client's house.
Oh my God.
I mean, seriously. And it was that's definitely, and you talk to a lot of business owners and they will all say that employees are the toughest part, and you have to have them to grow. Yeah. So, and I was definitely not where I am now, right? So I was still kind of in this like, all right, like if you're going to be part of this, you got to love the idea just as much as I do. But now, I'm much more grounded about that, and kind of realizing like, hey, if you're really this serious entrepreneur, you just got to realize that that's the pressure that you have inherited, right? I mean, you're going to be thinking about it at night, and your employees are going to be sleeping. So it's tough. It's very tough.
So piggybacking on that then, now going forward, having multiple years under your belt in terms of experience managing startups and running startups, like, for example, when you are looking for employees, what are some qualities during the interview process, or maybe some things that really stand out to you that you can not like necessarily guarantee, because everyone's on their best behavior, but maybe hedge your bets in a sense, like for a good fit for the team?
So for College Deeds, no interviews. A lot of friends. But in particular friends that had worked at landscaping companies. There was definitely vetting. It was more through natural conversation. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's one thing I do enjoy about where I come from, is from largely blue collar work, the concrete industry. So I do have a keen eye for work ethic and, can you swing a hammer and are you going to give up the moment the first drop of sweat comes off your face? Like there's definitely people who aren't built for physical labor. Mm-hmm. But I think this is kind of a good place for XY Consulting because now that I've grown, I think in order to, from a technical perspective and more of a white collar hiring process, you have to find people who have this certain way of thinking. Because like I said, I would not want to hire a bunch of people who just don't have passion for coding and are just kind of churning out Stack Overflow solutions that are loosely pieced together. So from that aspect, you have to identify people who have this special kind of logical way of thinking, and they can actually solutions, but just come up with unique solutions in a programmatic perspective that are very unique and straight from their fingertips on the keyboard. Certainly using online resources because that's very important, but learning how to uniquely do that in cool ways. That's kind of what I look for from a technical perspective.
So then, building upon that, maybe, what would you say? What would be any kind of advice or maybe pitfalls that you have learned to avoid, or any kind of parting words for someone who is listening to this and has made it all the way through, and it's kind of really piqued their interest in there's this idea that they've had for years that they have, always thought that'd be a good idea for a product or whatnot, and they're thinking about taking that first step to try and help establish that.
It's funny because we've been talking a ton about this idea that you can just go online and file for an LLC. Don't do that. Don't listen to me.
So forget everything you've heard.
Definitely do that later, and that's something I still struggle with. So if anyone takes anything away from this is pursue the idea as if it already exists. Don't worry about the technicalities because certainly once you will know when it's time, if there truly is a demand for your idea and you truly do execute on it, because it's a huge problem for me. I'll come up with an idea laying in bed and think I need to go register. Don't do that because you don't want to get it's like just taking it. You just cannonball in. Don't do that. Go walk into the shallow part. Definitely, but treat it as a real entity. Take yourself seriously. Take the leap of faith without fogging your vision with kind of all these technicalities we've talked about. But understand that it's not too far of a reach to get there. So once you can validate the idea, build it or execute on it or, design the logo, all these different things and validate that there's an opportunity there, also understand that you are very, very close to owning your first business. Very close.
Yeah. Stan, it's been awesome talking to you, man. Seriously, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you guys are listening now, we are on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. You can find us on the Digital Fireside. If you need to write in, if you have any burning questions, I'd like to get Stan back on here because I think we really gelled with in terms of talking about a lot of overlap with, a creative endeavor and trying to juggle that between, a day job and, a hobby and that sort of stuff. And if you have any questions, you can write into contact@thedigitalfireside.com. All right. And don't forget, if you have enjoyed this at all, let me see. I always struggle with trying to put it out the outro, not to sound too preachy or anything. So if you've enjoyed what you listened to today, be sure to go and rate us on iTunes. We really appreciate the support. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you guys have a great day.